This is your Math Gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic. On this video, we're going to write a quadratic equation if we know the solutions to that quadratic equation, and do these two problems. All right, so on the first video, we had fractions and integers. Now what happens if we have an irrational number like square root of 7 or negative square root of 7? We're going to follow the same pattern. If square root of 7 is a solution, that means that that came from this equation, x equals square root of 7, and the other one must have been x equals negative square root of 7. So this might seem unusual to you, but you could write that as x minus square root of 7 equals 0, or x plus square root of 7 equals 0. Again, just following the pattern, which means these could have been factors of the original equation. Now, usually when you factor something, you're doing it over the integers. You don't have square roots, but it is possible to write factors with square roots. So for instance, that could have been the equation. Now, hopefully you recognize this as the difference of two squares, because this is of the form a plus b times a minus b, or actually this one's a minus b times a plus b. So the outer term plus square root of 7x and the inner term we're going to cancel. So we have x times x minus square root of 7 times square root of 7, which is just 7. And I have just written a quadratic equation where the solutions are square roots of 7 and negative square roots of 7. Now, of course, you should always check. For instance, I'm just going to check one of these. How about negative square roots of 7? But we're going to check it into this equation. All right, so I'm going to put in negative square roots of 7 in for x. Do order of operations. Well, when you square a negative, it's positive. Square root of 7 squared is just 7. 7 minus 7 is 0. So you can see that that really is a solution. Now, if you were given this equation, x squared minus 7 equals 0, you probably wouldn't factor it like that, although some people might. Usually you would solve this a little bit differently. So over on the right here, I'm going to say, what if somebody had said solve x squared minus 7 equals 0? Usually we would do this by adding 7 to both sides and taking square roots. So we would do that a little bit differently, but notice we would get the same answer. So when we take square roots, it's plus or minus square root of 7. So notice I really do get the solutions. But my method was a little different to solve it than by factoring. All right, here's a problem where I have two imaginary numbers as solutions, complex numbers. And again, we're just going to follow the same pattern. So if these are the solutions, I have x equals 5i, or x equals negative 5i. That must have been the previous equation if I had done it through factoring. And then I set each one of these equal to 0. Granted, most people aren't going to solve an equation and get factors like this, but it is possible to do it. So these must have been the two factors, x minus 5i times x plus 5i. And you might notice again that we end up looking at a difference of two squares. So the middle terms are going to cancel out. If you did the outer term, you'd have 5ix, and if you did the middle term, you'd have negative 5ix. Those would cancel. So we have x times x squared, and then we have minus 5i times plus 5i is a negative 25i squared. All right, hopefully you remember what I squared equals. That is negative 1. So this equation becomes x squared plus 25 equals 0. Now again, if you were asked to solve this equation, x squared plus 25 equals 0, you probably would not known to factor it as x minus 5i times x plus 5i. You probably would do it by subtracting 25 and then taking the square root of both sides, just like we did in the previous problem, and you would get an imaginary number. But it should also make sense to you that you're not going to get a real number here for x, because if you square a real number, you're going to get a positive number. And if you add two positives, it's not going to add up to 0. So this seems reasonable that you would get complex solutions to x squared plus 25. And you can check it by plugging in 5i for x, just like I checked the square root of 7 or the negative square root of 7 in the previous problem, and make sure that you would really get 0. So let's just check one of these. Let's check 5i. In this, x squared plus 25 equals 0. So you have 5i squared plus 25. 5i squared is 25i squared, which is 25 times negative 1, which is negative 25 plus 25, which, yes, is going to add up to 0. So hopefully you should always check your answers and make sure it's true. Lastly, if you did solve it, if somebody had given you x squared plus 25 equals 0, you probably would not have solved it by factoring. You would solve it the same way we did in that previous problem. Let's go try it. How would I solve x squared plus 25 is 0? So just a little review. You could subtract 25 from both sides, take the square roots, and then remember, when you have the square root of a negative number, it's the square root of the absolute value of that number times I. And square root of 25 is 5. So notice you would have gotten the solutions of plus or minus I. So everything seems to make sense, hopefully. All right, there are also ways of doing these problems, finding the equations using a formula that comes from just kind of noting what would happen anytime you have two solutions given to you. So we'll do that on the next video. This is your Math Gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic.